20 survivors will be welcomed back into emotional embraces they doubted may never happen.
The crowd at Hostages Square has been there non-stop. I was there last night, local time, and it was really building even at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they remained there because they're just so excited for this momentous occasion. Many people didn't think it would ever come. They had serious doubts given that the Israeli military operation was ramping up. There's almost like a collective holding of breath for everyone until they see them and know that they're in the hands of the IDF. I'm actually standing at one of the helipads at the hospitals that will receive the most of the hostages. These hostages are in a very critical and unwell condition. They've been in captivity for more than 2 years now. So it's all hands on deck here to make sure that they have the smoothest ride possible. That first hug for these families will be unbelievable. It's hard to even imagine what that will feel like.
And we know President Donald Trump has flown to Israel. What do we know about his visit?
Yeah, so his is going to be quite a flying visit. He's only going to be here in Israel for 3 hours. He is expected to meet with the hostage families, and following that, he will address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and then he will fly on to Egypt, where he's meeting with world leaders to sign that Gaza peace agreement, and then there'll be a peace summit to follow.
Our superannuation system is the envy of the world.
That's Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers today announcing big changes to Australia's superannuation system. But the question, of course, is, are you better off? Here to help us answer that question is our economics expert, Stephen Johnson. Stephen, who are the big winners from today's announcement?
Well, the big winners are going to be the average young Australian worker today, who will not be facing such a big tax burden in 4 decades' time when they retire, because Treasurer Jim Chalmers today has announced that the balance of over $3 million will be indexed for inflation. So that now only affects 0.5% of people, or 80,000 retirement savers. But if you didn't index that for inflation, you'd catch the average young Aussie worker today in their 20s, who would be on the average full-time salary of close to $100,000. Now, Diana Messina was the AMP Deputy Chief Economist who made this warning a few months ago about what happens when you don't index for inflation.
Yeah, so if that's who the winners are, who are the big losers?
Well, I suppose the big losers would be Treasury, because they wanted to raise an extra $2.3 billion a year from otherwise foregone revenue from those superannuation tax concessions. So you could say perhaps the taxpayer's the loser here, because it does cost money when you want to be able to cut back on those concessions and have more for the federal revenue.
Well, I think it's fascinating if we dig a little bit deeper into how this came about. When you talk about that sort of distinction between what Treasury might have wanted and what Jim Chalmers announced today. Let's take a listen to what the Treasurer had to say.
So this is a government which takes feedback seriously, which works through issues and advice in a methodical and a considered way.
So as we just heard, this is a government that apparently takes feedback seriously. How do you think feedback shaped Jim Chalmers' announcement?
Well, the Self-Managed Super Fund Association, or they call the SMSF Association, they were very concerned about two aspects of this policy that was announced in 2023. That was taxing unrealised gains. That is the paper value of assets, the capital value of assets before the assets had even been sold. So that was a concern for those who had a self-managed super fund, who owned a farm or a commercial office premises, and it was very hard to sell those assets to get under the $3 million threshold. So the big winners today are the self-managed superannuants who actually had lobbied to have the unrealised gains component taken away. And of course, the other big winners, of course, are the young people who don't get slugged in 4 decades' time when it's indexed for inflation. The Greens had a policy of lowering the threshold from $3 million to $2 million, but indexed for inflation. And the Greens are pivotal to getting this through the Parliament. The Coalition from the very start 2 years ago had been opposed in principle to the idea of taxing unrealised gains or taxing assets before they are sold off. So perhaps this may help get the Coalition to be more open-minded about the policy. Now you're no longer taxing unrealised gains.
Yeah, I think this whole listening to feedback is very much about getting this legislation through Parliament. Jim Chalmers said today that 14 times more people will benefit from these changes than will be negatively impacted by them. Where do you see this going now, Stephen?
Well, it has to go to the Senate because it's been on the books now, the better targeted superannuation concessions for the better part of 2 years. And the Deputy Secretary for the Treasury, Diane Brown, last week, she told Senate estimates they were working on something and they were in fact talking to the Prime Minister's office. So despite Labor having a landslide in the lower house, they don't have the majority in their own right in the Senate. So they needed to find a way to get this through. The Greens wanted the lower threshold. The Coalition were opposed to taxing unrealised gains, as in fact were crossbench senators like David Pocock, and also the lower house Teals were opposed to taxing unrealised gains as well. So basically the politics of it is they've listened to the feedback of the Teal MPs and senators who didn't like the principle of taxing unrealised gains, and they often represent wealthier electorates.
Indeed. And the Australian taxpayer may be a little bit worse off in the process. Economics reporter Stephen Johnson, really appreciate your insights on Newsworthy today.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Ben.